The Blockchain New Zealand podcast is brought to you by Easy Crypto. 5 years ago, a passionate bunch of Kiwis created Easy Crypto in New Zealand to enable Kiwis and others to buy and sell cryptocurrency. The Easy Crypto website is simple and straightforward. They have heaps of great educational content that caters to both beginners and experts and are very transparent about fees. You can buy crypto with New Zealand dollars or with your credit card and get crypto sent directly to your wallet. Investing in cryptocurrency can of course be risky, so always do your own research. Visit easycrypto.com to start your crypto journey today. Cool, you ready?
Yeah.
Born ready. So the guy that introduced us, Paul Quickenden, he referred to you as a crypto OG. And so I did some digging into your socials, and it looks like you've been tweeting about Bitcoin since like early 2014. You even founded a consulting company way back in 2013. So I'm interested in kind of taking a trip down memory lane of how you see it almost a decade ago. When did you first get into Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I found Bitcoin already a year before that in 2012. I was over in Switzerland, and my hobby at the time was building a 3D printer. And one of the parts that I'd ordered and had been shipped to me had broken, so I was trying to find somewhere local rather than going back to the US supplier, and ran into a kind of German, small little shop that had exactly the part I needed. And when it came to check out, there was PayPal logo, there was the Bitcoin logo. Okay. And it was like, okay, cool. And I don't know if it was the Google kind of filter bubble, but at the time, everything was coming back in German. It's all about Berlin and, more of the Chaos Computer Club and their involvement in early adoption of Bitcoin. So I kind of thought it was more of a geographically isolated thing. And It wasn't until I moved back to New Zealand later that year that it's like, hey, there's people, kind of talking about it here in tech circles and, amongst friends, like, hey, let's, see what this is about, and just experimenting and kind of seeing it more of a payment thing still, because that was my first lens. And yeah, of course, once you've kind of read the white paper, you go, oh, there's more to it than that. It's kind of, hey, there's a whole technology kind of revolution that is possible with what we were then starting to call blockchains.
Reading the white paper, I didn't have like a aha moment. I read the paper and I was like, okay, there's some stuff here I need to go dig into and figure out. So it was much more of a slow burn for myself, and it was also a bit later. Right around that time, Ethereum ICO'd. Were you paying attention to that? Were you?
Yeah, that was a really interesting time because by that point, we had already, started a consulting business and kind of been thrust into expecting to be the experts, right? And there's that famous quote that you are an expert once someone else calls you one, right? And so just because I'd been paying attention over the years and keeping track on the forums, at that time almost everything was announced on Bitcoin Talk. Meant that, I was kind of expected to know. And the Ethereum kind of pre-sale and ICO there actually seemed too risky for me. I was like, okay, I'll wait and see. And then obviously after that, it was like, okay, cool, this is a proper new network. These guys, because at the time it wasn't, I know Vitalik had his name on it, but it was more of a group of Vitalik and people that had come and met together with him that were presenting themselves as this Ethereum project. There was no foundation, none of that sort of stuff yet. So it was always, I guess that's my personality as well. Being in security, it was like, let's wait and see, kind of.
I mean, that in itself is a bit of a contradiction. If you're heavily involved in crypto, yet you also come from the security side where you're, full-time evaluating risks.
Yeah, yep. And in fact, that was our first paying customer, was a Bitcoin fund over in Sydney. And at that time, they just found us on our socials and went, hey, we want to fly you and your business partner in, spend a whole week going through all of the possible risks that we're facing before we put, investor money into this fund. And that was, I think, a turning point for me as well of not only is this an industry that's going to grow, but also my specialization as a security researcher and practitioner would be actually really key to that broader adoption.
Yeah, when I first found out about Ethereum, I went to CoinMarketCap's website, and that's how I found out about it. This is in 2017. I just went, oh shit, there's like I have a lot of catching up to do at this stage. So I was definitely a bit later to the scene. If you've got a paying client coming from Sydney asking you to take you through the whole thing, you're definitely an expert by then.
Yeah, yep. Well, still winging it and, really just trying to apply all of the existing principles, right? And so there were new things at the time. The concept of a multi-signature wallet where you're bringing together multiple keys to be able to kind of have approvers, if you like, and if a threshold of those different signers have all signed the same transaction, then it goes through. That was an alpha feature on Bitcoin with Armory Wallet, and that's what they wanted us to assess. So we dug into all the code and really just did as thorough a job as we could. But our end recommendation was this is still too risky. We've got more on the risk side of things than we do on the tick, this is okay.
For sure. We'll definitely come back to multi-sig in a bit. Let's talk about BlockchainLabs. You're co-founder of that, is that right?
Yeah.
How did that get started? From my point of view as an outsider, as someone, getting into crypto on the Google, like who's in Auckland, who's in New Zealand, who's doing what, I definitely found you folks very prominent just through basic search. So how did the labs get started?
Yeah, we can trace it right back to the first Bitcoin conference, which was down in Queenstown in 2014. And that was called Bitcoin South. And there were only about 30 to 40 kind of local people there and almost as many speakers, right? So Fran had done a really good job of getting the world's kind of other experts or people doing interesting things in crypto at that time into Queenstown for that conference. That's where I met Mark Pascal.
Yep.
And he already ran a software development company. And, it was also around the time of the Ethereum white paper. So everyone was kind of going, who's going to actually develop these smart contracts or these decentralized applications? And so we kept in touch. And then after Ethereum had launched and, the first kind of mainnet chain was live, it was before Homestead. And yeah, it was kind of like the Mark then popping up going, let's run a conference for, Ethereum. And it's like, okay, great. That sounds like fun. And yeah, that got really a lot wider attendance. There was perhaps almost 200 people in Auckland and Wellington at that stage. And that was really great because, we could see that excitement and the enthusiasm that people were going to build stuff. This wasn't just going to be a financial technology. We'd kind of moved from just exchanges or speculating on coins to actually building things. And the key event that happened the same week, so we had one of the Ethereum Foundation developers over at that conference, and he was part of what was called the DAO at the time, and he was one of the key holders. Yep. And so it was quite fun during the Auckland event. We're kind of between speakers going, hey, there's $10 million of Ethereum in the DAO. And then next speaker, hey, there's $15 million. And he was starting to freak out.
Watching it fill up, yeah.
We were watching it fill up. Yeah. And then we went down to Wellington and we watched it get drained. And it was like, that was just another aha moment of before we build anything, we have to make sure it's all secured and audited. So yeah, a few more discussions with Mark and we said, hey, let's take some of the brightest developers that there are, train them up and everything across the language and start auditing smart contracts.
Yeah. This is now the DAO is different from now what we colloquially know as DAOs.
Yes, yeah. And to be fair, even the DAO back in 2016 wasn't really a DAO because it wasn't very decentralized at all. And it was more speculation on what are all the things that are going to be built on Ethereum.
Yeah. Laura Shin has a great book called The Cryptopians, and it has a very heavy section on the DAO and sort of details almost minute by minute how all that went down. And I mean, it's looking back, very crazy stuff. We have since seen maybe higher dollar value losses or security breaches, but at the time, that really shook the industry.
Yeah, and that was almost 14% of all of the Ethereum in existence at that time was in that DAO contract when it started getting drained. So, yeah, that definitely, shook a lot of people's confidence. But still, there were enough people building that they then went, hey, we've just got to allocate part of our budget is to get as many different audit teams as possible to review every line of code.
How do you go about auditing a smart contract?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And in those early days, there weren't best practices. So that was the first thing was like, okay, can we work together with the other security research teams to establish some of those best practices? Can we also make sure that there's just not one, even within our company at BlockchainLabs, we wouldn't have just one person review it. It's, kind of peer reviewed. But then with our clients, we're like, we don't want to be the only auditor either. So here are these other audit firms from South America and the US and Europe that we work well with and kind of have that shared understanding and shared processes. So,
is that still how it's going today? Specialized firms, occasionally sharing resources?
Yeah, it's still very specialized firms. There's more of them. And definitely some of those early firms that are still running today have scaled, like Chain Security. They started a little bit later, but they actually became part of PwC Switzerland for a while there and then spun out again back to Chain Security. But they have really kept pace with the scale that was needed. BlockchainLabs being in New Zealand, we couldn't attract quite as much talent, but the talent that we did have, like knowledge sharing was very easy.
New Zealanders love to punch above their weight.
Yeah, yep. And there's generally a trust, like in the same way that in some of those early ICOs, people were being trusted to be key holders, right? Some New Zealanders, that was almost how they, came to prominence, was just being a known person that would hold a key of a multi-sig to make sure that those millions of dollars weren't going to be spent inappropriately.
Yeah, you still see this ongoing when projects pop up. Who's holding the keys to the treasury?
Yep.
And are they doxxed? Do we know who they are? Yeah. Does somebody know who they are, even if they have pseudo-anonymous social media profiles?
Yeah, and coming through 2017 when we had that kind of ICO craze, our key function before we even looked at the contracts was to evaluate the client and the project team and the people behind it. And yeah, we turned down more customers than we actually accepted to audit because it didn't matter if they were willing to pay. If we couldn't find a real company and a serious team behind it, then we're like, sorry, you're not a customer of ours. And that had some unintended consequences in terms of, and you still see this today with audit firms. There's the kind of tier one auditors who do a lot of due diligence before they'll even assess the smart contracts. And then you've got the tier two audit firms who will just take anything as long as they're paid. And the quality does vary between the two.
Is there a legal implication here if you're not investigating who the team is and you're producing an audit for them? Or is it more about sort of ethics and integrity? Or
it's more about ethics. And also, it's nice to be able to say, hey, we're an audit firm where just none of our projects or clients that we've worked with have been exploited, right? And there's always some trust assumptions. The more complex the set of smart contracts for that decentralized application, the more that there is some person who might have control within that team. And that's almost like a hidden risk in some of these cases. It's like, was it an insider exploit or was it an external person? And so by doing that due diligence, we just remove that risk as well.
Yeah, the insider security hole, we'll never be able to remove that one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we're trying to get more and more permissionless, right? That was the whole point of these blockchains, but you still see in Ethereum, there's some people with trusted kind of roles to be able to upgrade certain contracts if something went wrong or to freeze things. And Vitalik actually did a recent podcast on network state and was even talking about layer twos and how they're still not permissionless enough. But if we can get to, that point in the next year or two, then he will feel like the job's done. Like we've finally handed over something that can just run.
Yeah, that's on Balaji's new podcast. Yeah. Was episode 1 a good listen?
It's a great listen, and a nice walk down memory lane for some of us that remember those events, but also I'd say a good primer. Vitalik can be quite technical in some of his podcasts, but this one was really pretty easy understanding for the average listener.
You brought up there about layer 2s. Have you been following what's happening Ethereum layer 2s?
Yeah, one of our BlockchainLabs clients was themselves a layer 2. And seeing that since about 2018, we're talking about roll-ups, we're talking about Plasma and Gluon. And those were the early kind of first steps, but they were typically a layer 2 that was led by a project that didn't necessarily allow everyone else to get on there. So it's only been since 2020 that we've had Polygon and Arbitrum and Optimism that are real layer 2s.
Real in the sense that they're processing transactions, or in the sense that anyone can join and leave?
Anyone can join and leave. Anyone can, kind of build a different bridge other than the official bridge if you want to. And so the challenge still is that some of those controls around upgradability and those sorts of things, they haven't taken the training wheels off yet. So
I saw today or yesterday, Polygon announced their ZK EVM should be testnet. Testnet should be live this month.
End of March.
Next month, yes. And in March. And so I think that's pretty exciting. There's a lot of hype around this term ZK, the zero knowledge, I guess, procedures or proofs that can prove and verify computation. Do you have any thoughts on this? Is there a lot of hype here, or is it actually, are we coming through and going to wildly scale?
Yeah, so zero knowledge proofs can scale computation because you can do things off chain and then create the same proof that it was processed correctly, right? And then just submit that proof on chain. And so that will definitely help with another kind of class of scaling that's not about the transaction volume, it's the type of things that we actually want to run or execute in a decentralized way. And then there's the privacy kind of side of things where at the moment, most blockchains are just completely open book, every transaction.
And then some, if there's another term for it, it's
it really is. There's very few ways to actually protect your privacy if you are, and that's something you've got to accept at the moment. Even back in Bitcoin, kind of realized very early on, it's not a good idea to do anything criminal on a kind of public blockchain because it's just completely traceable.
Yeah, big misconception, right, with newcomers that think that you're guaranteed some anonymity there. Vitalik himself, he flagged privacy as like kind of a make it or break it issue on Ethereum. He's like, impressed with the progress so far, but if steps towards privacy cannot be made in the near term, I believe his phrasing, was that Ethereum itself isn't going to make it. So this conversation right now in crypto about privacy, and I guess it spills into the broader tech conversation around data as well, massively important.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more of kind of users in general in tech wanting that privacy of their information and also of any transaction records. So I do think that is a big trend over this coming decade. And when you look back, I think one of Vitalik's main kind of challengers there was Zuko, who started Zcash. And as a cryptographer, he started from that first principle of privacy needs to be built into the chain right from the start. You can't bolt it on later.
Yep.
And so Vitalik is kind of walking that line of, I think there's ways, guys, that we can put the right cryptography into the protocol in a way that we can have the best of both worlds. We can have some things that are completely public and easily auditable, and other things where they need to be private, they can be.
Yeah, I'm all for the best of both worlds as well.
Yeah, well, I like to look back at the rise of e-commerce, right? So early 2000s, SSL certificates weren't a common kind of thing, and if they were just on the checkout portion, right? So your logins, username, passwords, all those things were being transmitted clear text over the internet, right? And so that was the main reason why you then had corporates go, oh, we need an intranet. We need something that's private just for our employees or our suppliers, and they'll log in here, and we'll just, keep that separate from the main internet. And then as SSL and encryption of internet traffic became the norm across every website, then it allowed so much more to actually be a part of the internet. Sure, there'll still be some walled gardens where things are behind a login, but they are generally accessible across a common network. And I do think that's what we need to see within blockchains, and specifically Ethereum.
So you've got a new-ish project. I don't know how long you've been working on it. Maybe you can tell us, what is Everlasting?
Yeah, so it's not too new in terms of I've had the need for something like Everlasting for many years now. As anybody with crypto, you age and you kind of see the value go up and down, but you keep thinking about, okay, what would happen if I was hit by a bus? And some credit as well to my wife of her reminding me what would happen if you were hit by a bus. It's like, okay, great. And since 2018, lawyers have been coming to myself and BlockchainLabs and saying, hey, we've got this one customer and we have no idea what to do. Can we do something bespoke? And it's like, yeah, sure. We can tailor something for those individual clients that want to include crypto assets in their will or in their family trust. And coming into 2020, I had exited BlockchainLabs and was starting to think about what I'd do next. I went, well, that's still the biggest unsolved problem, and how can we actually make it repeatable so it's not a bespoke solution for each individual client? Can we make more of a platform that brings together the clients, lawyers, other financial advisors into one secure place, and also make it user-friendly in terms of they can leave at any time and they're not actually giving over control of their crypto assets. Because as we keep saying, it's your keys, your coins.
Of course.
You don't want to be actually giving over complete control over that. So it's having that platform along with the cryptography to allow a multi-sig kind of arrangement to be put in place. So as long as you're still alive, you've got control over those assets, and we're just a passive, kind of approver on those. But if you were to pass away and we get the lawyer coming saying, hey, we're going to execute on this will now, great, those assets can be distributed to your loved ones.
So you've got a video on your website. I'm going to quote you here. It says, you say, when you start out in crypto, you're told to be your own bank. However, in reality, as your wealth grows, you need to learn to be your own fund. So can you just expand on that? What does be your own bank mean, and what does be your own fund mean?
Yeah, and those are kind of terms that are thrown around a lot in the crypto industry, right? Be your own bank was definitely one that was back there in 2012 and 2013. And I think a lot of people didn't realize what it meant of, do you have a security team that is monitoring what's going on? Do you have, different honeypots or procedures that might protect your assets even while you're on a plane or, traveling somewhere else? And for some of those early Bitcoiners, they could, right? It's like, great, we'll put in place all of these security procedures. But for the average person, they never really got, okay, there needs to be the people involved to make that happen. That's not something you can just do yourself. And my experience, shaped from that first client in Sydney around what it takes to have a crypto asset fund and all the operating controls and everything around that. I'm like, okay, in fact, instead of it being, one fund, many customers, how about we just make it that is like all the operating controls and everything around your assets, and you're still in control. There's no fund manager per se.
So you're talking about, like, in terms of a fund, when you're dealing with other people's money, when you're dealing with client money, then suddenly you have all these additional procedures and protections in place. I see it. I see the parallel here.
Yeah, and even just a second pair of eyes, right? There's a number of times where people have come and just said, hey, I'm doing this large transaction. Can you just check over and make sure I'm not signing something I shouldn't sign? And that's still an unsolved problem. So this is, a part of that is great. Once you're kind of set up with Everlasting, there's the expertise and those controls to make sure that you're not mistakenly signing a malicious transaction.
Just back to your overall premise, I also have this ongoing joke with my missus. Of course, she knows that I run the family books, and a lot of that is in crypto.
Yep.
And of course, she knows that if I get hit by a bus, that it's going to be very difficult for her to recover any of those funds. And so I've spent some time thinking about this. I've got little kids as well, so that pushes out my time horizon, pretty much all the way to the end now that I'm thinking about my kids in the family. And so I've thought about things like running a dead man's switch, and I can have some sort of just either like plain text distribution or some sort of treasure hunt to get passwords and keys. And you can kind of make it as complex, as creative as Hollywood could make it. I've also basically just thought about like asking a lawyer to handle it as a family estate policy. I've got some crypto coins, and I haven't decided on anything, and I'm kind of in the spot where I'm just thinking like, no, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it up to me, and hopefully. Hopefully there won't be an accident, and there will be some way to transfer any necessary wealth moving forward.
Yeah, one of the challenges is when you put in place like a dead man switch, or even, hey, there's these titanium plates buried in these, locations that have the different seed phrases on them. That's all point of time, right? So quite often it gets outdated really quick. As we saw with DeFi and things really booming in 2020, I started to notice more of the loved ones coming saying, hey, can you help me access this? My husband's passed away, and I've got the seed phrase, but I need some help to access those funds. And that either moved to different addresses, or it was like, we can only recover a portion of those assets. And that's devastating, knowing that there was a much bigger sum that was there, that if their loved one was still alive, they could benefit from, but because that person's passed away, some or most, in some cases, of the crypto assets were inaccessible. So I think it's got to be something that's more managed and kept alive, right? And ensuring that it's something that you don't feel like it's locked up and you can never access it. But on the same side, you've got your flexibility, but should you go tomorrow, the whole amount is recoverable. Yeah. I think that's key.
Okay, so in terms of maybe a frequently asked question, can't a lawyer handle this for me, or is that pointing back to the same issues you just...
Yeah, so lawyers are also risk adverse. They're not unlike security professionals, kind of going, hey, how do I make sure that this doesn't end badly for me? It might be okay for the client, but they aren't really trusting that they could hold even your Facebook or YouTube, username and password. If you were an influencer, they're like, no, don't give us any credentials or anything. And then you think about digital assets being...
You're serious? That's a red flag, or that's a...
yeah.
Could be an issue.
Yep, it can be an issue that even though, them having a shard or a piece of a private key that has, been separated there, they really, really do worry about what if they mess up, right? And so they also have, the law hasn't really evolved so well in order to actually separate whether custody of a private key is also part ownership of those assets. And so, yeah, there's that whole legal framework of it does need to be put into that estate plan in a way that it changes in nature, that they are, completely isolated from any form of ownership while you're alive, because they're your assets and you're in control and you can do what you want with them. But it's only then tipping over both legally and technically once you pass away that they are then enacted with the permissions to access those funds.
I guess we're talking about a brand new kind of paradigm here. If you have a private key, those are bearer assets, and so that also in my internal discussions with how do I do this is like, well, I'm not sure. I just want to give a law firm or a lawyer my private keys, and there's more sophisticated ways to do it, but that's kind of where it starts, and I guess that's what you're talking about as well with the credentials. If you give someone access to then be able to either move the coins or sign a message, or post something nefarious on YouTube or something like that. So let's talk about some of the sophistication that you can bring to it. Let's come back to multisig. What is multisig and how are you using it?
Yeah, so broadly, multisig is, kind of going back to those early days in Bitcoin where you could have separate private public key pairs that would all sign a message to create a joint wallet and then have that set with a threshold. So be that 2 out of the 3 keys needed to sign anything before the transaction would be accepted on the network, or 3 out of 5, kind of a majority of the signers were needed to transact. And Ethereum actually took that another kind of step further in terms of with smart contracts, we can even get more granular permissions to say this key can propose a transaction and these ones can approve it. And, we can say not just a simple majority of 3 of 5, we can say these 3 are, there and only these ones are used if those ones haven't signed, and different combinations there that allow for more fine-grained control. And really we should call that more of a multi-key wallet rather than a multi-sig, even though it's validating the signatures that have been put forward from each of the key holders. It's not set up in the same way between it was in Bitcoin and its genesis and how it is now with Ethereum and multi-sig smart contracts.
These keys you're talking about are all independent. They're not generated in like a way that your wallet does, multiple keys or anything like that.
Correct. And that independence also gives a really nice transparency and auditability of who signed, right? And that's another key thing that when you're looking at lawyers, they want to be able to, if there was anything happen to your assets, they want to be able to stand up in court and say, look, you can see on-chain, we didn't sign that transaction. Our key wasn't used.
Very important.
Yeah. And
so coming back to this idea that I still maintain ownership of my coins, if let's say there's a legal team and then let's say there's the everlasting group, is that already out majority of me where I only have 1 key?
Yeah, so our typical setup is to have the client with multiple keys.
Okay.
So that, you can already maintain that custody, control, your keys, your coins. So that's an important part of delineating then our keys can only be used in certain ways. Your lawyer's key should only be used in an even smaller subset of ways. So.
Do I need to also bring on my wife or my partner in order to do this?
Yeah, that's another really nice way to bring them on that journey and get them a bit comfortable, is they might hold the second key. And the other benefit that you've got in this type of setup is losing any one key is no longer a critical failure, right? If you are just relying on your own wallet and whether that's a hardware wallet or software or something happens and you can't recover your wallet, it's gone. Whereas once we get into this multi-key setup, losing one key isn't a problem. That key can be rotated. And in fact, it's good practice to keep rotating keys so that if you have exposed a key to a potentially malicious website, they can't just sweep your wallet and take all your assets.
Yeah, that's a good point about blockchains in general. And you mentioned it earlier about I think you said, if you're on a plane and you're not monitoring what's happening, right? Blockchains are kind of unique in the sense that you might not know that you've been hacked until you go to make that next transaction. You're not getting an alert on your phone saying that. You could sign up for an alert by a third-party service. However, until you look on chain, you might not have any idea.
Yeah. Whereas then you flip over to the security professionals, and we get alerts all the time because we're set up in that way, and it can be middle of the night. Great. Need to go in and protect either a protocol or individual funds. So, you're kind of getting that benefit of the security team if you choose to.
By the time you bring in multiple people to engage in this process, so you bring in, your family members or I'm not sure, your estate trustee, and you bring in Everlasting, who are who have the audited smart contracts and are the technical experts, and you bring in your legal team. Are we adding heaps of complexity to this system in the sense that what we really just need is some sort of like social proof between me and my partner or me and my kid to say, okay, yeah, dad passed away. I know he's got some coins. Where I'm going with this maybe is in terms of having like a redundant key set so that you can, have a boating accident, you can lose some keys, but still be able to recover your crypto. I think another thing Vitalik is working on is this idea of like social recovery.
Yeah.
Have you been looking into that?
Yeah, and in fact, I've used social recovery in the past. There's a few wallets that already have that in place, such as Edge Wallet. It does work, but it's still a burden on those people to actually maintain their keys. So you just don't know, they might have lost access or other things there. So you're just not having that maintenance, I guess, if you like. The other thing is, I think we need to span the whole spectrum. So we've talked a bit about multi-sig, and kind of social recovery and hardware wallets and things are down at the individual level. Kind of get to multi-sig a little bit more of this corporate, or at least amongst firms or amongst people and companies. And then when you come to the crypto exchanges, you've got what's called multi-party computation, which is how an exchange can have thousands of private keys to control each individual deposit address or address for users to send their assets in or to withdraw them out, which can be quite high volume. And my goal with Everlasting is to bring all of that together into one framework that's repeatable. So social recovery and also some of the zero knowledge proof social recovery, I think, is going to be a really interesting place for us to explore. So things like you might have a address that isn't at all part of this Everlasting multi-sig, but similar to your dead man switch, if it hasn't transacted in 60 days, then a message can be signed that would then provide that zero knowledge proof that, great, now those funds can be pulled into the multi-sig to be dispersed to your loved ones. And I think there's going to be a lot more innovation there so that those, kind of safety rails around users mean that they're not feeling locked in, but assets still can be recovered at the end of the day.
Are you planning on handling NFTs for people as well?
Yeah, that's one of the most popular requests, actually, because of signing messages is so common in the NFT space, right? When you log into OpenSea, you sign a message with your private key. Yep. That's the main attack vector that is so commonly affecting users, and they're losing their high-value NFTs. Another interesting thing is actually the NFT creators. They've got royalties that are encoded on-chain to come to that specific wallet. And they want to make sure that their non-crypto savvy family could benefit from those royalties for generations to come.
Oh, that's a cool use case as well, being able to maintain that long term into the future.
Yeah.
What's your business model here? How are you going to, if I maintain control of my keys until the end, this could be a very long term thing. So, is it subscription, or how do I sign up? How do you make money?
Yeah, and just in terms of that length, when we're talking with some of our early customers, it's like, hey, we've got this, 30-year business plan, but then there needs to be the 300-year kind of business plan. It needs to outlive all of us. So that's definitely something that we've got in mind. And one of the things that makes it sustainable is the concept of staking. So you can stake your Ethereum to be earning a quite, safe protocol reward at that layer one.
I love it.
Kind of chain level. So by participating and validating, that's a longer term view. And so instead of us banging the drum being like, you're not secure enough and what would happen if you passed away, like, hey, there's an incentive here. We can securely set you up with some staking that is accruing, and actually your balance is growing year on year, right? So if you've got that mindset of, I want to leave some, crypto assets to my wife and kids, then that's really where we're finding the business model works the best, because people don't really think about security, or they think it's too complex or too costly, and we're making it more of a incentive of like, hey, you get this security and you get this upside.
Yeah, that's one of my thoughts as well, is that a service like this, more tailored to either high net worth, wealthy people, or like groups or family trusts or things like that, right? What about, Joe Main Street has some NFTs, has a few $1,000s. Can you target those clients as well?
Yeah, and we do have that kind of entry level product that is tailored for that of, hey, I still don't want any lawyers or other professional service providers as part of this, but I do want some help setting this up in a way that there are some controls, and I know that you guys can, do some recovery at the end of the day, but it's not the whole package. So yeah, while we've got that estate, as our main product for, say, the high net worths, there is the everyday product as well, which is just the security piece.
So I did some research on some of your competitors. We'll see what you think. So I just found this company on Twitter called Nunchuck, and they are for Bitcoin. Someone posted a screenshot. It says a Bitcoin inheritance plan has been activated. So I just did a quick look. They're charging $450 a year for a subscription to their gold plan. And the way they're doing it is their inheritance is time locked. So it can only be used to claim your Bitcoins on a future date chosen by you. So you also mentioned the time lock nature of what is possible here. And like, that's kind of interesting as well. I mean, maybe I want to time lock stuff for my own savings benefits, or maybe I want to time lock stuff until my kid reaches a certain age, not necessarily to do with my death. So presumably you're also interested in this idea of being able to lock until a set date.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's again, just the client requests, right? And it's like very simple to implement that. And so that's not something we're charging extra for. If that's something you want, great. That's part of your kind of estate package.
So they do, they say they do a 2 of 3 multi-sig or a 2 of 4 multi-sig. Another Bitcoin company, Casa, they do a 3 of 5 multi-sig or a 3 of 6 multi-sig. Casa's plan is much more expensive, $5,000 a year. But in terms of this like M of N multi-sig, is there like best practices or industry standards for how you sort that out?
Yeah, and I think the best practices really do come down to the distribution of those keys, right? So not just by having them in different people or different legal entities, but also geographically. And so with some of the ones at the lower end, there's not necessarily the geographic redundancy that you might actually want in case of natural disasters and those sorts of things. And yeah, casa is definitely one of those early kind of providers that has served Bitcoiners for a very long time, but is also quite North American centric. They've really struggled to get out of that kind of US legal structure kind of thing to really adapt it. And so that's where I had tried to onboard with casa back almost 9 years ago, and it just didn't work for me. It wasn't the right setup. And so we're trying to make sure that by bringing lawyers on this journey in the platform, that the lawyers can actually make sure that legally it's the right fit for you. And so that means that whether you're here in New Zealand or Australia or Singapore or South Africa, it's going to fit your needs. So we've got a much higher likelihood of being able to solve your problem.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good point, that you probably want a service based where you are familiar with all the local structures and laws.
Yeah, and legally as well, a lot of the laws around, wills and estate go back centuries, and they do expect a local lawyer to go to the courts to do what we call probate, which is then processing and saying, yes, we have, correctly transferred this person's assets on. If there were debts, they've been repaid. All of those things still needs to be done by a local person. And we're not going to see that change very often, even in terms of like the physical signatures on a will, right? There's various firms out there like, oh, we're just going to do digital signatures. You can, do your will and sign it with a kind of private key.
Yeah.
But the actual lawyers in the High Court, we're talking with quite a few of them, they run their hands under the physical piece of paper to feel the indent and go, yes, great, this is a physically signed. It's not a photocopy, it's not forged. That is the copy of the will. And while we've got all of this cryptography and wonderful things we can do to enhance that, that's still where they're going to be for some time to come.
Are you now an expert in estate law?
Yes, yeah, I think I'm having to expand that across, all the jurisdictions that we're going into. So while we're starting New Zealand and Australia, it's quite simple. When you get to some of Southeast Asia, like Japan and Korea, they have sometimes more flexibility, but also more nuance in terms of the process that has to be followed. Here in, well, at least New Zealand, Australia, and some of the common law countries, that means it's kind of law that we've inherited from the UK. There's a lot of trust in the lawyer, and the lawyer almost assumes, all the powers of you as an individual to actually execute on things. And some of those other cultures and legal frameworks, there's more kind of checks and balances, which is nice to see.
I think you have a Singapore flag in your Twitter. Is that right?
Yeah, so Singapore will come later this year. So we're already kind of live with New Zealand and Australian customers. And I think it's really about scaling, right? So our early estimates are that there's around 120 Kiwi Australian adults that pass away each month with crypto, right? And, that's a fair few, right? It's part of the...
it's a good thought experiment, more than I would have picked.
Yes, and even you asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, no, it's not going to be that many. But adoption is there. Sometimes that'll just be a smaller amount. Other times it'll be a larger amount. But it's still a volume that justifies, starting this off. But then because of the level of adoption in some countries like Singapore, being closer to 40, 45% of adults having some crypto, that's then just 3-4 times more potential customers that we need to serve each month.
Singapore is going for it, 40, 45%?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And I think they've also got an interesting attitude, both on terms of speculation, right? They're happy to speculate with a portion of their wealth. So with Korea and Japan, they've got quite a large amount of crypto adoption, but then they're also really comfortable with like, well, of course I have a lawyer, and of course I've got my tax advisor, and bring this whole wealth package around me. So they're really a perfect fit for what we're doing, but we want to make sure that we can, we don't just stick to the countries that we're comfortable in. We want to keep expanding that out.
I suppose as well. Other cultural places with different procedures will, perhaps you can learn something that can then be applied here. There's quite an overlap here, right? Because we always think of like, oh, crypto is global. The blockchain is anywhere you can run a node, anywhere you've got the internet. But really, you also have to include your local jurisdiction. You have to include, where you are living and who you can call up to say, can you help my family in the event of emergency? So quite an intersection there. How do you view the idea of long-term plans? And by long-term, I mean, I mentioned already about like having a family and how your time preference, really goes all the way to the end, or in Bitcoin terms, you're lowering your time preference quite a bit there. I think Satoshi had the ultimate vision, perhaps, even reckless by today's standards, of thinking like, okay, we're going to distribute these coins so that we can get them in the hands of the people. But the whole project is going to take 130 years until all the coins are distributed. And like, maybe even some arrogance there to think that your software is still going to be running next century, not even past your own lifetime, but past your ancestor or your kids' lifetimes, right? So I love stories that involve things like this. Another one that comes to mind is like the stonemason who's building a cathedral, who knows full well when they start, they're never going to see the end of this, just because of the nature of how long it takes. So as someone who's now in low time preference business, how do you view these things?
Yeah, I think also we can look not just the kind of decade that we've had crypto as an industry, but also the preceding decades of computing and networks back since the 80s, right? And seeing that you could have been the developer of an early internet protocol and you would be now very surprised that it's still running, right? So with technology and especially protocols, right? Apps, we expect them to update and change and morph over time, but a protocol, kind of once it's formed that consensus and the set of rules that we're going to do this, it can be very long lasting. And in fact, that's why I chose the name Everlasting for my company, is because it is going to, have that very long time frame where things will still keep running. And the shorter time preference is make sure that you do make the most of it and do keep monitoring the security, or actually keeping up to date with the chain or wallet upgrades, those sorts of things. But in essence, you could, kind of, if you could see into the future or time travel, see that actually things that are either left behind as fragments, people who have passed away, or things that you put in place might still be there running past your lifetime. And we have one early client who's actually very interested in cryogenics, and hence the 300-year kind of business plan to make sure that if he is reanimated in a century or two from now, that his crypto assets will still be there, ready for him to reaccess. So yeah, there's definitely people thinking in that much longer time frame for sure.
I love it. Our man Hal Finney, right? He also was is hopeful, I suppose we could say on that lines too. There's maybe a niche Bitcoin philosophy that says that like the idea of passing on your Bitcoins for future generations is not really how we should look at it. You should be able to use your Bitcoin for your own personal wealth generation, and so that you can, be free to contribute. And then if Bitcoins end up being lost, and certainly we have seen lots get lost in various ways, then really that's a gift back to the community, fixed supply, reduce the total amount out there, buy everyone else's Bitcoins. What do you think about that?
I do see that from the libertarian kind of anarchist view, and definitely it's one that has been quite common. However, we just don't see that reflected in the price, right? So it's too simple a supply-demand kind of equation, and actually the coins that are lost, there are some charts that kind of track lost Bitcoins or, coins that haven't moved for more than X number of years, but there's not really a precise way to account for that, so it doesn't seem to actually manifest the end result that they were going for. And then contrast that with kind of my personal view of actually, if you're going to leave something for humanity past your lifetime, then wouldn't it be great if you could actually lock up your Ethereum that is being staked in a way that nobody can ever access the original stake, but the ongoing rewards are being dispersed out as a charitable donation to either different community organizations or charities that can then continue on
to run the network, to support developers.
Network, and also help with education or other human needs that might be there in years to come.
What's up and coming for Everlasting? What can we look for those people that are interested?
Yeah, so the actual staking portion of the product is what we're really focused on at the moment. So customers can already onboard with the security and the estate with lawyers, but the staking is something that we're bringing live in the next few months. And one of the things we're doing that's, again, kind of quite topical is not relying on centralized entities to actually run the validator nodes. So we're distributing that and making it still accessible. You don't need to be super techie to run your own node and risk that there's goes offline or there's downtime and you get slashed. But we're distributing that so that we can jointly run nodes together. And I think that will also help to ensure that longevity of those assets as well.
So you're not depositing into Coinbase and
correct
and saying, here you go. What about something like Rocket Pool?
Rocket Pool's good. It's still relying on the other operators that you don't necessarily know. So there was actually a case earlier in the month where someone was going, who is this validator that is just constantly getting slashed? Because it is bringing down the whole, kind of profitability of Rocket Pool. So I think taking that concept but making it amongst known people that know each other and can actually monitor what's going on is it's what we call distributed validator technology. And that's something that is, again, in test nets at the moment, but will be a product that we can offer very soon.
So you can have a small number of people that all have vested interest that are all known, as opposed to decentralized protocol where you have, potential for Sybil identities and a lot of anonymous people in foreign lands that you can't get a hold of. And the benefits of doing it this way?
It's really about that redundancy. And so you can set it up in ways that you maintain complete control over those assets. The withdrawal key for that ETH is still back to yourself, your wallet, but you can run multiple clients. So in the case of like 5 different individuals, you can split that to 4 others in a way that each one of them benefits from the redundancy of the others. So as long as there's a majority out of 5, so 3 nodes are still, having internet and power, then all 5 individuals are all benefiting from the staking rewards of their stake without needing to worry about the floods have just taken out power in my neighborhood.
No, I think that's a really unique innovation, especially as applied in this space. Is anyone else doing this? Have you?
Yeah, it is one of those things that's just emerging.
Okay.
So we are seeing some teams in the US and in Switzerland that we're all kind of working together on that. But as a product, it's really about making it easier for those individuals. And Everlasting, because we have this self-custody ethos anyway of customers keep custody of their assets, it's really a good fit for us, whereas it might not be a good fit for other platforms or services.
Coming to the end of our time here, I want to talk about Blockchain New Zealand for a minute. I'm kind of a newcomer. I've been in the org just over a year and a half maybe, but you were actually a founding member, is that right? Way back when?
Yeah, well, there was an initial failed attempt in 2014
Okay.
to set up what was going to be the Bitcoin Association,
Okay.
and I just couldn't get the required number of people to sign on the same document of what our policies were and what our objectives would be. So then tried again end of 2016 and kind of started that first blockchain association mostly out of the meetups that were already there. So Bitcoin and Ethereum meetups in Auckland and Wellington had the highest attendance, and we were trying to professionalize how we would run the events and we were getting all of these fantastic speakers who might be traveling to New Zealand saying, hey, I'm going to be in town, can you just spin up an event in 2 weeks' time?
Right.
And so, the association really helped with that. Also, outside of the conferences and events, there were businesses, be it, kind of banks or other corporates who were like, hey, we want to stay abreast. We don't want this to be just a technology that's out there in the fringes and, us trying to do our own separate thing. How do we bring the people actually working in blockchain together with some of the people that might benefit from it in a more corporate sense? And so that's how it evolved from just kind of the event focus into what's now BlockchainNZ as part of that NZ Tech umbrella association.
So from your lens, give me some advice here. How do you see our role moving forward? How can we, strengthen the organization? How can we contribute? How do you see our value to member organizations like yourself playing out?
Yeah, I still see so much of the value is in that educational content, right? So like this podcast, it's really fantastic for people to just learn something new each week and each month for where they are on the journey, because all too often we kind of assume a level of knowledge around blockchain and crypto that perhaps is inaccessible to people who have joined more recently. So I think embracing that and also, there's like the statistic I gave earlier, right? So it's roughly around 20 Kiwi adults that we estimate would pass away with some form of crypto in New Zealand each month. And just doing that research and assessing what is actually the state of play, what types of security are people using for their crypto assets, I think is really valuable to inform people who are looking at it, say, take lawyers going, wow, that's a lot more than I thought. I should actually upskill and better understand this so that I can serve my clients who they have wills with me. I just don't know that they also have some crypto that's not included in it. So that evolution, I think, is a really important part for BlockchainNZ.
Very well said. You mentioned earlier in a positive light about we're talking about death here, about a partner passing away and needing to be able to have that communication system in place. There is a now famous story in crypto around Quadriga where the founder Gerald Cotton and his wife went on honeymoon in India. He died of a heart attack apparently, and took those private keys to his grave. Is this a lesson for us all to learn?
Definitely. Yeah. In terms of having a centralized party having some keys that control coins, we've always had business, practice and helped other companies or other fund managers to make sure that they've got controls so that there's no single key person risk of control over some keys. And that serves not just the fraud element of one person runs away with the money, which some people speculate might be the case if he suddenly pops up somewhere actually alive,
Yep.
but also in the case of just those unexpected events. And I think people individually struggle to think about it in that same sense. So you can also go, well, I'll tell my wife or partner where my seed phrase backup is, but if you both go, then, what happens then? And
Right. We just came through 2 cyclones in 3 weeks here in New Zealand, I guess, but particularly in Auckland and the North Island. So hypothetically today, on your way back to the ferry, a tree falls down and takes you out. What happens? What happens next?
Yeah, so for me, thankfully, I've kind of pioneered a structure that can ensure when my lawyer is then going, okay, what are all the assets there? It's accounted for, including the crypto assets. And, between my wife also being part of that package, those assets are transferred. And in many cases, people actually want them to stay in crypto. They don't want it to be like, I actually sell the crypto assets and disperse dollars out to loved ones. It's like, hey, how do we set up a new policy now that then covers those beneficiaries so that those assets might be there either till they're 21 or just through their lifetime. So yeah, it's kind of coming back to that legacy planning. It's more than be your own bank or be your own fund. It's put something in place that's going to outlast your own life.
Will the last Bitcoin ever be mined?
Oh, that's a very good question. I do think that there's enough social and almost meme value in continuing to run the Bitcoin software. So I do think it will be mined.
And who is Satoshi?
Oh, it's another great one. I still like to think of it as that kind of group of cryptographers and having some understanding that let's make sure that no one person can be attributed for Bitcoin's creation so that, be it governments or any other nefarious reasons, you don't take out one person as that initial founder. And I'm very convinced Hal Finney was one of the people involved, but the others will never know.
Paul, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Look out for the next episode of the BlockchainNZ and podcast, probably in the same spot you found this one. Cheers.